But when I said Michael, you probably forgot it. You said, I'd love that.
Yeah.
It's such a great name. You've worn it well, my
Bill Gaither had spent a lifetime standing in the spotlight, but never like this. The courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel heavier than the last. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted uncomfortably, waiting. The judge sat motionless, eyes fixed on the papers before him. Lawyers stood ready. Cameras were positioned just outside the doors, hungry for the moment the world had been waiting for. And there stood Bill Gaither. No choir behind him, no music, no comforting hymns. Just the cold reality of a courtroom and a sentence that could erase everything he had built. For decades, his name had been synonymous with faith, hope, and gospel music. Bill Gaither wasn't just a performer. He was a symbol, a voice of reassurance for millions. A man people trusted with their hearts, their beliefs, and even their money. But today, that image was cracking. As the judge adjusted his glasses and prepared to speak, those seated closest to Gaither noticed something was wrong. His shoulders were tense. His hands trembled slightly as they clasped together. His eyes were fixed on the floor, as if he already knew what was coming, and feared it more than anyone could imagine. Then the judge began to speak. The words echoed through the courtroom, each one landing like a hammer. Before the sentence could even be fully delivered, Gaither's face drained of color. His body stiffened. For a split second, it looked as though he might speak or pray. Instead, his knees buckled. Bill Gaither collapsed in the center of the courtroom. Gasps erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as people jumped to their feet. Someone shouted for help. Another called for medical assistance. The judge immediately ordered proceedings to stop as court officers rushed forward. Time seemed to freeze. Was this the result of unbearable stress? Or was it the crushing realization that his life, as he knew it, was officially over? Paramedics arrived quickly, pushing through the stunned crowd. Cameras flashed from outside as word spread rapidly. Bill Gaither had collapsed during sentencing. And just like that, the story that no one wanted to believe became impossible to ignore. The shockwave hit the gospel music world almost instantly. Fans across the globe stared at their screens in disbelief. How could the man who wrote songs of redemption and grace be standing trial for crimes this serious? Churches whispered his name in disbelief. Radio stations hesitated before mentioning it at all. For years, Bill Gaither had been viewed as untouchable, a man of integrity, faith, and leadership, someone who spoke about honesty, humility, and service. Now, his name was being linked to words no one ever expected to hear alongside it: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Instead of touring with his band, he was now escorted by court officers. Instead of uplifting audiences, he was facing accusations that threatened to destroy not only his freedom, but his legacy. So how did it come to this? According to prosecutors, the story began years earlier. Quietly and gradually, donations poured into Gaither's ministry from devoted followers who believed their money was helping spread faith, fund outreach programs, and support charitable causes around the world. But investigators claim something very different was happening behind the scenes. They allege that large portions of those donations were systematically redirected into personal accounts. Money meant for ministry work, prosecutors say, was instead used to fund a lavish lifestyle, luxury properties, extravagant travel, and private investments hidden from public view. As the investigation deepened, The accusations grew darker. Financial records allegedly showed patterns that couldn't be explained away as accounting errors. Funds went missing. Reports didn't line up. Tax filings raised red flags. What once looked like a successful ministry now appeared to prosecutors like a carefully managed financial operation designed to benefit one man. Then came the witnesses. Former employees stepped forward, some reluctantly, others with visible emotion. They described an environment where questions about money were discouraged, where concerns were brushed aside, where loyalty was expected and silence rewarded. One former staff member reportedly said, "We trusted him completely." Questioning anything felt like questioning God himself. Others claimed they noticed money disappearing without explanation. When they asked for clarity, they were told not to worry. Some said they felt pressured to stay quiet to protect the ministry's image. Even longtime associates and friends struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with the man they thought they knew. "We didn't want to believe it," one insider admitted. But eventually, the numbers stopped making sense. Then, investigators uncovered something that changed everything. Offshore accounts. According to prosecutors, multiple bank accounts located outside the country were linked directly to Gaither. These accounts, they argued, were used to hide income, avoid taxes, and keep certain financial activities hidden from both the government and his followers. For many watching the case unfold, this revelation was the turning point. Offshore accounts aren't accidental, they're deliberate. Prosecutors argued that this wasn't a misunderstanding or poor financial management, it was intentional deception. Gaither's legal team fought back fiercely. They claimed the offshore accounts were tied to international ministry projects. They argued that the money was being used legally and appropriately. They insisted that the accusations were built on misinterpretations and incomplete information. But prosecutors weren't convinced. They pointed to missing funds, conflicting records, and multiple testimonies that painted a consistent picture. To them, it wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern. And now it all came down to this moment. Back in the courtroom, after Gaither was stabilized and proceedings resumed, the tension was unbearable. The judge's words would determine whether Bill Gaither would walk free or leave the courtroom in handcuffs. The once revered gospel icon sat silently, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the table before him. He had carried the weight of fame, responsibility, and influence for decades. But this weight was different. This was the weight of consequences. When the courtroom finally reconvened, no one spoke above a whisper. Bill Gaither returned to his seat, visibly shaken. His face looked older somehow, more fragile. Gone was the confident presence that once commanded sold-out arenas. What remained was a man facing the most defining moment of his life. The judge cleared his throat. This was it. Every eye in the room locked onto the bench as the judge began to read the final sentence. Each word felt deliberate, unavoidable, final. The court acknowledged Gaither's contributions to gospel music and his influence over generations. But that acknowledgement came with a sharp reminder: fame does not place anyone above the law. Then came the verdict. The sentence was severe. Years in federal prison. Financial penalties so massive they would erase nearly everything he owned. Mandatory restitution to repay the funds prosecutors said were misused. And a permanent mark on his record that could never be erased. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Some supporters wept openly. Others sat frozen, unable to process what they had just heard. For many, it felt unreal, like watching a story that belonged to someone else. Bill Gaither did not speak. He simply closed his eyes. For a man whose life revolved around words and music, silence said everything. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Headlines spread across the globe. Social media erupted. Fans argued fiercely, some defending him to the end, others expressing heartbreak and anger. Many felt betrayed. "How could someone we trusted do this?" one fan wrote. Others clung to faith, insisting the system had failed him, that the truth would one day come out. But no matter where people stood, one reality was undeniable. Bill Gaither's career was over. Radio stations quietly removed his music from rotation. Churches hesitated before using his songs. Organizations distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. His name, once spoken with reverence, now carried controversy. As Gaither was escorted out of the courtroom, cameras captured a final image. His shoulders slumped, his steps slow, his future uncertain. Goodbye to the stage. Goodbye to the spotlight. Goodbye to the legacy he once carefully built. Whether history remembers him as a fallen icon or a misunderstood figure will be debated for years. But one thing is certain: the man who walked into that courtroom was not the same man who walked out, and the world will never look at Bill Gaither the same way again. The courthouse slowly emptied, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. Outside, reporters shouted questions that would never be answered. Camera flashes followed Bill Gaither as he was escorted toward the waiting vehicle. But he didn't look up. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, empty and distant. For the first time in his life, there was no crowd singing along, no applause to soften the moment, only judgment. Within hours, the fallout began. Church leaders who once praised Gaither's influence released carefully worded statements. Some expressed sadness. Others emphasized accountability. A few remained completely silent, unsure how to address the collapse of a man so deeply woven into the fabric of modern gospel music. Radio stations quietly adjusted their playlists. Concert venues removed archived promotional material. Organizations that once proudly partnered with him began scrubbing his name from websites and programs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet erasure. For fans, the emotional impact was overwhelming. Many felt as though something sacred had been taken from them. Songs they once played during moments of worship now felt complicated, tainted by doubt and disappointment. Some supporters refused to accept the verdict. They flooded social media with prayers, scriptures, and messages of loyalty, insisting that Gaither had been targeted because of his faith. Others begged people not to judge, arguing that no one truly knew what happened behind closed doors. But there was another group, just as vocal, who felt deeply betrayed. These were the people who had donated their money in good faith, who trusted that their contributions were helping others, who defended him for years without question. Now, they were left asking themselves a painful question. How did we not see this? Behind the scenes, the damage was even more severe. Financial auditors moved in to untangle what remained of the ministry. Properties were seized. Accounts were frozen. Longtime employees lost their jobs as operations shut down. What had once been a thriving organization built around music and faith was reduced to legal paperwork and debt. For Bill Gaither himself, life became something unrecognizable. Gone were the tours, the studio sessions, the meetings filled with praise and plans. Instead, his days became structured by prison schedules, legal appeals, and long stretches of isolation. Those close to him described a man consumed by regret. Not anger, not defiance, regret. Regret for the trust he lost, regret for the people he disappointed, regret for the legacy that slipped through his fingers. Some nights, according to those who had contact with him, he replayed moments from his past. The early days, the simple beginnings, the faith that once guided him before success complicated everything. And that may be the hardest part of this story. This wasn't a man who started out seeking deception. This was someone who once inspired millions. Someone who spoke about integrity and responsibility, yet somehow drifted so far from those very principles. As time passed, public interest slowly faded, as it always does. New scandals replaced old ones. New names dominated headlines. But for those who followed Bill Gaither's career closely, the silence felt permanent. No comeback tour, no redemption album, no final explanation. Just absence. Historians and critics will argue for years about how Bill Gaither should be remembered. Some will focus on the music, the undeniable impact, the songs that shaped generations. Others will argue that character matters more than talent, and that influence comes with responsibility. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. A brilliant career overshadowed by devastating choices. A man who lifted millions, yet fell harder than anyone expected. And as the courtroom doors closed that day, one message became painfully clear. Fame does not protect you. Faith does not excuse you. And no legacy, no matter how powerful, is immune to collapse. Bill Gaither's story did not end with applause. It ended with silence.